Okay, so we will call our second virtual public hearing to order and recognize that we are holding our meeting on the unceded territories of the Sechot and Hupachesit First Nations. And let me get down to this page. Uh-oh. Okay. So we'll read some basic information about public hearings so everyone is aware of the process first. So this public hearing is being convened in order to consider the following proposed bylaws. Number 1, official community plan amendment number T5, cannabis cultivation and development permit area regulations, bylaw number 5012. And number 2, zoning text amendment number T25, cannabis cultivation, bylaw number 5013. At this public hearing, any person present who believes that their interest in property is affected by the proposed bylaws shall be given an opportunity to be heard on the matters contained in the proposed bylaws. However, it is important that all who speak at this meeting restrict their remarks to matters contained in the bylaws, and it is my responsibility as chair of this meeting to ensure that this is done. Those of you who wish to speak concerning the proposed bylaws are asked that you begin your comments to council by clearly stating your name and address. You may then give us the benefit of your views concerning the proposed bylaws. Members of council may ask questions of you following your comments. However, the main function of council members this evening is to listen to the views of the public. It is not the function of council at this public hearing to debate the merits of the proposed bylaws with individual citizens. Everyone who deems their interest in property to be affected shall be given an opportunity to be heard at this meeting. No one will be or should feel discouraged or prevented from making their views known, regardless of whether you favor or oppose any particular application or argument. Please refrain from applause or other expressions of emotion. Restraint enables others whose views may not coincide with your own to exercise their rights to express their views and enable all views expressed to be heard in as impartial a forum as possible. After this public hearing has concluded, council may, without further notice, give whatever effect council believes proper to the representations made at this hearing. We will now have the description of the applicant to be read by the city clerk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the applicant in this instance is the City of Port Alberni, and the city is applying for consideration of changes to the city's official community plan and zoning bylaw 4832 to introduce cannabis cultivation and processing as a permitted use within city limits. The proposed amendments would introduce new definitions, identify specific zones, and provide other regulations and policy direction for cannabis cultivation and processing uses. The proposed bylaws are official community plan amendment number T5, cannabis cultivation, development permit area regulations, bylaw number 5012, and zoning bylaw text amendment number T25, cannabis cultivation bylaw number 5013.
Thank you. And now next is background information from the manager of planning, and the report is from September 9th, 2020.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just gonna share my screen here. Hopefully you're able to see it there. Perfect, thank you. Okay, so staff have prepared official community plan and zoning bylaw amendments that would introduce hold on, I'm just gonna actually move this so I can see my presentation a little bit better. There we go. Perfect. Thanks. Sorry about that. So staff have prepared official community plan and zoning bylaw amendments that would introduce cannabis production facilities, so cultivation and processing, as a permitted use. The proposed bylaw amendments would introduce new definitions, identify specific zones for the uses, and general policy direction for cannabis cultivation and processing uses. These regulations would apply to properties that are located within the city limits. So in terms of the public engagement that's been done to date, in 2019, you might remember that staff undertook a 3-month-long public engagement process to gather input on cannabis production facilities. The majority of people at the time supported cannabis cultivation and processing within city limits as a permitted use. Many did not have issues per se with the industry as long as it was going to be managed and regulated effectively And we're excited to kind of see an opportunity to bring more professional industry to the city. However, some people were completely opposed to the legalization of cannabis. And we did find that a small number of people who participated in our public engagement process were specifically opposed to some facilities that were being discussed in the regional district. So not a city application, a regional district development application. The engagement process did help staff identify some of the key concerns around cannabis production facilities. So things like odor, air quality, and waste management being kind of top of mind. And then today, the public hearing today is really a great additional opportunity for the public to provide input for staff and council to take into consideration to further that public engagement initiative. So in terms of the initial direction, APC and council reviewed all the public input that was received and provided some high-level direction, specifically including that council really wanted to only see indoor facilities permitted within the city, so no outdoor operations. Industrial lands and some commercial lands were supported for permitting some cannabis production facilities. However, land zoned for agricultural was requested to be removed from the consideration, so we did do that. And then also there was a lot of support for development permits being required for all cannabis production facilities to ensure that we have specific design guidelines around what these facilities look like, how they're going to fit within the community, and some other aspects as well. So this is a good example of what would not be permitted within the city, a wide open kind of outdoor facility. I think it's just good to show that type of imagery. This would be something that would probably be much more appropriate for an agricultural rural area. Again, not within a more urbanized setting. And that's kind of the direction that council has given and what we supported with these bylaw amendments that are proposed today. This is something that we would hope to see. So this is an example of Aurora Cannabis in Quebec, an indoor processing facility. This is Rubicon in Delta, BC. This is more of a greenhouse operations, but would technically be classified as an indoor unless we were given further direction to limit that. This is a proposed indoor facility in Nelson, BC. So again, this is the type of development that we would be looking for and what we would be regulating with these proposed bylaws and the approach that we're taking. So as I mentioned before, the proposed bylaw amendments would introduce new definitions that we will go through briefly and are outlined in the report. They would identify some specific zones for the uses and provide other policy direction for regulating cannabis production facilities. So the new definitions that we have brought forward and are outlined on page 3 of the report, they're consistent with Health Canada's definitions, and we thought this was very important for making sure that there's a bit of consistency in how the federal government is regulating this, along with the provincial and municipal government. So that way, it's very clear when somebody's getting their license from the federal government that when they come and apply for their business license, that we know exactly how to interpret it based on the licensing that they've received from the higher levels of government. So we've provided kind of 2 different types of definitions, one being an overarching definition of what a cannabis production facility is, and that kind of creates a catch-all category for any of our general regulations or development permit design guidelines. Beyond that, we've created or we're proposing several specific use definitions. And the purpose of this is really to kind of create a bit of a tiered approach where some of our zones, like industrial zones, would permit larger scale standard cultivation facilities. And some of our more commercial zones can be catered towards kind of smaller types of facilities. So that's why there's a difference between an overarching cannabis production facility definition and then the specific use definitions. So in terms of the proposed zones, again here, we have the industrial zones kind of being open to any scale, being standard, larger facilities for cultivation or processing, micro cultivation or processing, or nursery cannabis. And those differences, again, are really just based on the size of the canopy that the facility is able to grow. And then for our commercial zones, we would target a smaller type of facility, so micro cultivation and micro processing or nurseries, but not the larger scale standard cultivation, which have probably a bit more of that industrial feel to them. And here we've provided a map of the proposed zones that would be impacted by the recommendations that we're bringing forward. So you can see most of our industrial, they are still located kind of on the west side of the city, kind of along the waterfront or the southwest end of the city. And then a few of our commercial zones kind of located along the Johnson corridor or along the Redford corridor. Most of the residential areas are relatively well separated from these zones for the most part. In terms of the general regulations, so these are kind of the overarching zoning bylaw regulations that would apply to any cannabis production facility in any zone. So these regulations that we've proposed are as follows. So quite obviously that the facility must be regulated and approved and licensed by Health Canada. I think that's pretty straightforward, and that a city business license would also be required for operations. We've proposed that these cannabis production facilities would not be permitted within 300 meters of the nearest property line of a site containing a school, daycare, or other cannabis production facility. And that last part there really is coming out from the public engagement discussion that we had, where there was some desire expressed by the public to make sure that we're not getting a whole cluster of these facilities all close to each other, and so that there is a bit of a buffer, making sure that we only have a couple in an area. Another regulation that we're proposing is that these cannabis production facilities may operate in addition to their processing or production in conjunction with a retail use if the zoning permits. So for example, our C3 zone allows for the sale of cannabis products. So if you had a C3 zone property that was doing production or processing, they would also be allowed to have a retail use. However, if it was an industrial site, we would not be permitting that retail use. We've also added this regulation around basically making sure that the facilities tried their best to contain odor, noise, light, and glare within the facility to avoid adverse effects that would impair the use, safety, or livability of adjacent properties. Again, adding this in here because that was one of the most important things I think expressed by members of the public, that they were really concerned about potential impacts on quality of life and the air specifically. So making sure that we really want to do our best to regulate that, and we provide a little bit more regulation through the development permit process, but at least it's here as well in the general regulations. Again, we're asking that all cannabis production facilities be required to obtain a development permit from the city. And so that regulates kind of the form and character, things like architecture, landscaping, signage, lighting, plans, as well as we're asking for some information about their filtration systems to make sure that the air remains clean and that odor remains contained. And then we've also proposed limiting the hours of operations from 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. And of course, plants don't stop growing after 8 p.m. This is more meant to really regulate when staff would be on site tending to the property, not the plants themselves, of course. So we've provided a set of development permit guidelines specifically that would provide some additional form and character guidance for commercial and industrial cannabis production facilities. And these are relatively consistent with our existing development permit guidelines, but just provide a couple of extra levels of detail around, do we want fencing in commercial zones? No, we probably want more landscaping used to kind of create buffers, whereas industrial areas, we would be more open to having walls or fences, for example. Trying to make sure that the developments don't have monotonous buildings, so that there's some interesting diversity to the way these buildings look. We've added things around making sure that that sound is well maintained within the property. We've requested that, or we would be requesting that all submissions for development permit applications include information about venting and odor control, again, because that is such an important thing that was brought up through the public engagement process. And as well as some things around kind of lighting, some additional information about kind of setbacks and buffers, but nothing too radical or out of the norm from what is typically requested within a development permit process. So in conclusion, the proposed OCP and zoning regulations would add new definitions, identify specific zones for cannabis production facilities in some industrial and commercial zones, and provide other policy direction for cannabis cultivation and processing uses. The public hearing today is an excellent opportunity for staff and council to hear from the community about the proposed bylaws and to take into consideration that new information. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation. City Clerk, do we have any correspondence?
Not attached to the agenda, Madam Chair, but we do have 2 late items of correspondence that were previously distributed to Council today, so they will form part of the public hearing report. And I will not read them in their entirety, but I will summarize them for you. So the first is from Sherry Garrick, who has not provided an address. She states, no mention of outdoor growing was in the published information. I believe that outdoor growing other than on ALR land should be banned in the valley due to the ground level ozone it emits and the poor air quality it causes for all residents. She comments on that much larger setbacks need to be in place. Language in the bylaw is very tame. Words like should be changed to shall. She comments that no mention of specific perimeters for carbon filtering is mentioned. The statement of protections of odor, noise, and light that are provided to the neighbors of these facilities are very vague and open to interpretation and corruption. What are the penalties? And then she comments that it is not the case of banning cannabis facilities. It is a case of placing them where they are not going to harm anyone else. Sites for these types of facilities should be vetted by the city with the residents' needs in mind. And in closing, she believes this bylaw proposal is a good start, but needs some further improvements to be a bylaw that serves the needs of all in the valley. And the second letter is from, it's from Dana Walter on Mallory Drive. And Ms. Walter says, I'm concerned about the cannabis bylaw that is proposed. If you look at the current city zoning map, the zoned area where cannabis cultivating and processing businesses could start up are mainly on the waterfront or close to the waterfront. I do not believe that these zoned areas are good sites for cannabis businesses, as there are daily breezes that come off the Alberni inlet. If companies are venting their buildings during the same time the breeze is coming off the water, the people in the surrounding area will smell the cannabis. That means tourists, residents, and individuals living and working in and around light industry, medium industry, heavy industry, service commercial, and highway commercial zoned areas are going to smell cannabis. She goes on to express concerns in regards to odor emissions, and then states, I think the council needs to ask themselves what image you would like Port Alberni to have. If this cannabis bylaw passes, how many cannabis cultivating and processing businesses will be allowed in city limits? She also asked council to think about the impact these businesses will have on the current weather system we currently find ourselves in, as well as when the valley experiences inversions. And she expresses her opposition to the current cannabis bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And do we have any input from members of the public?
We do not have anyone registered to speak, Madam Mayor.
And questions from council? Councillor Solda.
Just listening to the letters that were just read, do we have any answers regarding their concerns in that? I would love to know, have some answers.
Sure. So Caitlin, are you able to just comment on some of the comments about the the suggestion that some of the language is weak, I guess. I think from reading it, I would think it's likely standard, but let me know if you want to share anything on that. It would be great.
Yeah, I would definitely say it's fairly standard, and I think we've tried to go above and beyond in some degrees of what other municipalities have done by creating specific development permit requirements. That's not always a common approach. So let's say, this is just a random example, not necessarily accurate or true, but say Nanaimo permits cannabis production facilities in their industrial zones. They have industrial development permit guidelines, but not necessarily specific cannabis production industrial permit guidelines, development permit guidelines. So I think we have tried to go a little bit beyond in ways that make sense. I don't have the letters in front of me specifically at the moment, but I certainly would be happy to review those questions in detail and bring further updates to council at a subsequent meeting. The great thing about a city driving its own process is that we've got a little bit of extra time to make sure we do this right, and we're not being driven by a specific application. So we can certainly make further amendments or changes as directed, and go from there.
Thank you. Councillor Solda, did you have a follow-up question?
I do. It's not really, I would like to have some answers. I think they have asked some really relevant questions. And Madam Mayor, I know you've taken a tour of such a facility and you've had no issues. You just said you didn't smell anything in that, but I would like to put some concerns to rest, because we'll hear about this anyway. So we may as well put it to rest, and let's get our answers for these people too.
Yeah, and some of it as well, I would say, is already addressed. You know, the comments around not wanting or thinking we shouldn't permit outdoor growing, I would say we agree. And we, even though the public feedback when we did our input came back to suggest that outdoor grows be allowed on industrial lands, council actually took a step back from that and said, we don't think that we should allow outdoor grows anywhere in the city, with the exception, of course, of ALR land, where we don't have any control. I don't know what it is about doing meetings at home. I have children coming in constantly. Anyway, so I do think that council is taking somewhat of a conservative approach here in a lot of ways. And yeah, and the other thing that I wanted to comment on is the requirement to not have them within 300 meters of each other. I think also gives us just that comfort that we're going to be able to start this slowly and make sure that we are, you know, that the regulations are working. We're not going to have any clusters. Councillor Paulson and then Councillor Corbeil.
Just want to follow up on some of Councillor Solda's comments. And this is a whole new area for municipalities to be involved in. And I have a feeling that a lot of the general public don't quite know what this will look like. And Madam Mayor, I wonder if you just might make an overreaching comment on the tour of a facility that is done right. And that's our vision, is that type of facility, and done right, properly regulated, and just kind of what you saw and how you feel about it. A lot of people, I don't think they have the vision for what this may or may not look like.
Yeah, thank you. And I know, Councillor Paulson, that you had the privilege of touring Tilray as well. And I actually was really apprehensive of the industry. And then I heard your comments after your tour of Tilray, just to talk about how professional of an organization it was, and how, you know, the high standard that these buildings are built to or renovated to in that case. So the one that I visited was in Winnipeg, and we pulled up to the building, and you know, you would never know that it's a cannabis operation in that case. And then we went in, and outside the building, I've noted to people that, you know, couldn't smell anything, would have no idea that it's cannabis. I walked inside the building, and that was the really shocking thing for me. That even inside the building, I couldn't smell any cannabis. And the interesting thing about this operation that I went to was that it was a container model. So it was a building, a warehouse, and then inside the warehouse was individual containers. So the cannabis was in each of those individual containers, and they were all sealed and had their own independent air filtration systems in it. So, only speaking from the experience of viewing that, it certainly doesn't mean, I've seen bad examples as well. It doesn't mean that, we should give blanket approval. And it doesn't mean that I feel we should just allow cannabis in and believe there's going to be no issues, because I think that, like with any industry, there's going to be good and there's going to be bad. But what that gave me confidence in is that we are able to do this in a way that does not disrupt neighborhoods, that does not have, noise pollution, air pollution, smell. So I feel confident that this can be done in a very professional way and that it can be a very positive contributor to the community, but we need to make sure we're taking adequate steps to ensure that. So that's what this meeting is all about, is looking at the steps that are being proposed and making sure that this is the right fit for us moving forward. And like Caitlin said, there's no rush on us to do this. So if we do require more information, we're able to get it. I would just ask that we be very specific in the information we're looking for if we do want more information from staff. Councillor Corbeil.
Well, I was going to mention pretty much what you just did, Madam Mayor, that we're talking about facilities that are federally regulated and have much better ventilation systems than maybe some of the operations that we smell as we drive around town today. And, I think that going forward, we won't have the issues that we've had in the past. At least that's my hope.
Absolutely. Thank you. Other questions or comments from council? Councillor Solda.
Just one more thing. It's, like you were fortunate, and so was Councillor Paulson taking the tours. And again, it's something that's an unknown to me as well as to some of the members of the public. So that's just why I would like us to have some questions answered for the community that have asked, or the two people that have asked, and that would answer all the questions. I have no doubt that when I look at the pictures and the drawings and that, wow, it looks amazing. But just to address some of the concerns that a couple of people have asked, and it doesn't fester into more.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So as noted in my opening statement, council may, without further notice, give whatever effect council believes proper to the representations made at this hearing. In most cases, the report of this hearing will be presented to the next regular meeting of council, where council will decide whether or not to proceed with approving the application by way of passing further readings of the bylaw. Once this public hearing has terminated, council may not, as a group or as individuals, receive any further oral or written presentations on this matter, including what may be perceived of as informal discussions immediately following the termination of this meeting. I ask all parties to comply with this. Before closing the public hearing, I am going to call 3 times for any further speakers on the matters contained in the proposed bylaw. For the first time, is there anyone who wishes to make further representations? City Clerk, do we have anyone wishing to speak?
None that have been identified, Madam Mayor.
Was that someone coming on?
Dana, are you wanting to ask a question, Dana?
Yeah, I think.
Can you identify yourself?
Yeah.
Dana, would you mind starting by just stating your full name and address, please? And then you're welcome to ask questions.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I can turn on my video too. So Dana Walter, I'm 2245 Mallory Drive.
Thank you.
I just have some concerns. I spent the last 30 minutes trying to help somebody get on to this Zoom conference call so they can actually listen to this. And I'm just concerned that there's some hiccups, and I know we're COVID times, but some people are interested in listening to what's happening here, but they're just having some difficulties getting on and maybe aren't aware of the bylaws that are coming up, because number one, they don't read the paper or don't have access to the paper. So I'm wondering if there's any other way that information can be brought forward to the public to inform them that these public hearings are actually taking place, because it's my understanding that the Alberni Valley News is the only site, and maybe the City of Port Alberni webpage. Is there any other advertisement that goes with this to inform the residents of Port Alberni?
Thank you. City Clerk, could you just comment on, I know this was on social media a couple of times as well, giving notice. Could you comment on the process we follow for public hearings?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm sure Caitlin, our Manager of Planning, will jump in as well. But we follow legislative process, and notice was provided as noted in the newspaper. Caitlin, can you comment on whether there were mailouts for this particular one? And also, while Caitlin is coming back in, we did notify anyone or anyone who was required to register to speak. And if they were not required to speak, we also made them aware that the meeting has been live streamed on our website. So people do not actually have to log in via Zoom to be able to watch the meeting. People can watch it on our website live, and we've publicized that quite widely, as well as through our social media channels. And the bylaws have been previously introduced to council, so I think we've done everything that we legislatively can, and probably more.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's important on this one as well, and I'll let Caitlin speak in a moment, but this process has had many opportunities because we did go through, led by our planning department, quite an extensive public engagement over the course of the last year, and then it's been brought to quite a few council meetings additional to that. And I know it was on social media as well. I remember seeing it a couple of days ago. Caitlin, do you want to add anything?
Nope, just that what Davina outlined as the process is what we undertook, which is in guidance with what's required by the Local Government Act.
Dana, do you know if there's someone wanting to get on who is wanting to speak? Because we do still have an opportunity.
I could just ask them.
Yeah, you're welcome to.
Are you wanting to speak? Okay, she doesn't, no, the person doesn't want to speak.
Okay, just for information, it will be, it is available on our YouTube channel for anyone who wishes to watch it after the fact as well.
Okay, and if they should have concerns or anything along those lines that they'd like to bring up, because I've talked to a number of people, and I know you've indicate that you feel that you've gone above and beyond to educate the residents of Port Alberni, but a number of residents I've talked to were not aware of the changes to the bylaw or proposed changes. So I just want the council to be aware of that. You may think you're doing a lot of or advertising or informed things, but there's still a fair number of residents that maybe either I don't know, keep themselves informed, or maybe there's something different that you can do to educate the citizens of Port Alberni.
Thank you. Could either the clerk or the planner just comment on if somebody wants to give input after this public hearing and regulations around that?
Madam Mayor, after the public hearing has terminated, council may not receive any further information or any other input from the public regarding the proposed bylaws. So if at a future meeting, council would like to ask clarifying questions, that would be fine. But if council requests any new information, then that would trigger the need for another public hearing.
Thank you. I'll call for the second time if anyone wishes to make further representations or comments. And Dana, you are welcome to, even though you've already spoken, you're welcome to speak again if you like.
Well, as you can tell, the number of people that are on this site and the 2 people that have also sent letters in. I'm not sure of what happened before. I'm just concerned that the citizens of Port Alberni are not aware of what's coming.
Thank you. And for a third and final time, is there anyone who wishes to make further representations? Okay. There being no further speakers, I declare this public hearing closed. Would somebody like to move adjournment?
So moved.
Seconded by Councillor Paulson. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much.